Thank you for tuning in to the DDT Method podcast. I'm Drew Donaldson, and this week I'm sitting down to discuss all things coaching, training, and nutrition with Alan Cress. Alan Cress is an IFBB Pro bodybuilder and an incredibly accomplished coach in his own right. Alan came up coaching bodybuilders and then got into the functional health space. So he's one of those guys that can not only get you in the best shape of your life, he can fix a multitude of health problems or just generally keep you safe and healthy while you're changing your physique. He's one of those guys that can do it all and has done it all in terms of optimization and health. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the DDT Method podcast with Alan Cress. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. We have a very special guest today. I'm here with Alan Cress, and Alan is somebody that I don't know personally, but I've followed him for a hot minute in this bodybuilding, fitness, biohacking, longevity community world, whatever you want to call it. And I've watched Alan progress from being not just an accomplished bodybuilder in his own right, and not just a great coach for bodybuilders, both on the amateur and pro level, but I've watched him transcend his business and his coaching into being one of the most proficient coaches for absolutely anything that anybody has to deal with, from a health aspect to a general performance level. And I've watched his business level up from being a weekly check-in coach, like all of us really start out and like a lot of us remain, to somebody that's built this incredibly impressive business. And today, what I want to do is I want to go over some of the things that Alan works with, and some of the people that Alan works with, and some of the situations that Alan works with, and what his approach is and how it might differ from the common tropes and nuances that we see in regular day-to-day coaching situations that we see on Instagram, so to speak. So before we get into it, Alan, if you can just give us a little bit of background on yourself. What brought you to the game, and what brought you from where you started to where you are now?
Yeah, so I've currently been in the industry going almost 3 decades at this point. Last year, we actually just celebrated the 25th anniversary of the company. So that was a nice milestone to reach. But I started in athletics, playing basketball. I was originally going into physical therapy in college, did all the background, actually applied, got in and all that. But I kind of veered away from that because I was working as a physical therapy tech in the hospital setting. And it's just like so unmotivating because the clientele in there is not wanting to do what you want them to do. And it's hard to initially get into, the athletic population, which most people strive for. So, and at that time, I was currently doing one-on-one training just a little bit in Lexington Athletic Club in Lexington, Kentucky, because I went to the University of Kentucky. Had a little business there, but then after the experience in the hospital setting, I did that for probably 2 or 3 years. I fully transitioned into just personal training, just because obviously the clients coming in that way are more motivated. They want your help. They want to do whatever you're asking of them to get it to whatever goals they're perceiving. But I initially also started out with just training athletes. I wasn't even in the bodybuilding world for the first probably 3 to 5 years of me being a trainer. I was training high school, college, professional, in all sports. I don't think there's a sport that I haven't covered. Everything from motocross to soccer to Olympics and taekwondo, obviously professional basketball, college football, and everything in between. I started shifting into the bodybuilding demographic, obviously, because I started competing in bodybuilding. So that just got my name a little bit more recognized in that field. And then that kind of spun into what it become. And then my demographic shifted from primary athletes into physique enhancement, obviously physique competition. Did that for over a decade. And then I started running into walls with clients, why they weren't progressing, why they were hitting periods of plateaus with fat loss when we're pushing calories low and lots of activity. So that allowed me to dive deeper into physiology, connecting the dots, like where's this root cause coming from? And that's how I transitioned kind of more into the functional space to obviously where we are today as a company. And we pretty much can cover any gambit from bodybuilding to handling CEOs in crazy environments to fertility cases, autoimmune issues, and everything in between. So we pretty much cover the gambit when it comes to any demographic at this point. And pretty much everything's kind of come full circle. And I've seen everything in this industry, kind of come and go and then come back again. As we know, everything kind of revolves in a door, whether it's training, whether it's nutrition or whatever. Something gets popular, then something else gets popular, it goes away, then eventually it will come back. And as far as, the research part of the equation, it's the same thing. Us as, theorists and the bodybuilding world and the functional world, we don't necessarily wait on research to do something. We get a lot of anecdotal evidence with clientele. We put our theories together from research, but stuff that hasn't been proven. We implement it kind of like in a beta group with clients that are willing, and then we get results, and then we just keep improving and evolving the formula from there.
Now, one thing that you just said that I think is incredibly important is that to be in this very science-based community as far as approaching things from a functional health standpoint, it's not necessarily always based on the research. And I want to clarify that a little bit, because you'll have one crowd that's going to go, see, we don't need to follow any of these research papers. And then we have another crowd that just says, no, wait a minute, we need to only do things that have been legitimately clinically proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in XYZ type of study. I think what a lot of it comes down to is not necessarily knowing if one particular process or approach to things will work based on clinical research, but it's based on knowing how things work on a biological level and why to implement certain things at certain times. And a lot of that is also understanding why certain things don't work. And that kind of brings me into the coaching atmosphere right now. And it's kind of like the more things change, the more they stay the same. We still have this massive crowd of upcoming coaches and even established coaches that are perpetuating information of your basics of calories in, calories out. We want to get in shape. We're going to reduce carbohydrates, and then we're going to bump up cardio. And then when we hit a plateau, we're going to do it again. And then when we hit a plateau, we're going to do it again. And then you have competitors of all sorts, in a lot of cases women, that are basically eating ice chips and lettuce and doing 6 hours of cardio 2 weeks out from a show, wondering why they're not losing any body fat. What are some of the biggest problems like that you're seeing still kind of overtaking the fitness industry primarily? And what type of damage are people doing to themselves with this just linear basic approach?
Yeah, I mean, even with the functional world being more well-known now, and everybody's kind of more health aware, even in the bodybuilding world especially, the awareness is going up. But a lot of things still aren't changing, because there'll be a lot of people that preach it and are all health focused and whatever, but you still see a multitude of plans coming out and people being put through the ringers to get to, stage ready type physiques. And it's like people are putting on this facade. They're saying they're doing one thing, but they're doing something completely else. And that goes both ways for the coach and the clients, right? You have some coaches out there who are pushing the health perspective for clicks, for popularity, just to get their name out there more and more, but aren't actually applying it because they don't have the knowledge base to apply it. And then you also have the coaches that are doing a good job, but then you have the clients who aren't following the plans to the letter because they are thinking about the old school approaches and how, if they're plateauing, they need to just do more, eat less. And I've seen it with our coaches and myself, when you tell them, okay, well, we need to eat more, reduce volume, reduce intensity, whatever, their mindset, is like, oh, my goal is to win. If I do that, I'm not going to be ready for the stage or whatever they're preparing for, because it's opposite of what they've been told or what they've been taught in the past. So they don't actually apply what you're giving them. So we have a battle on both sides. So you can't blame all the coaches, and you can't, because the clientele has responsibility, and then vice versa. It's on both perspectives that I'm seeing things being kind of put together in the wrong aspect. Like, people aren't working together the way they should be. But I think more than anything is functional health has blown up, and it's a great marketing tool now. obviously, because when you promote health, that's a great in and buy-in from a lot of clients. You'll get more clients. But then if you don't actually know what you're doing, you're going to mess them up. And we've get plenty of clients that have been messed up because people are following these like black and white protocols that they think are out there and apply to everybody, like a thyroid protocol or a gut health protocol to kill off bacteria, to stuff to reset your immune system, or if you're having, high cortisol levels or adrenal insufficiency, low cortisol levels, they're throwing one protocol at them. And of course, some of these protocols will work with some people, but then they'll actually do more damage to other people because they don't know what they're actually assessing. They're not actually looking at data or testing to see it, because there's people out there now that are also saying you don't need to look at a GI map to really fix the gut. If you're dealing with a serious issue, you probably need to dig in and see what the actual cause is, because the problem is the symptoms are the same. Same with people with high or low cortisol. Two different approaches to correct both of those, but the symptoms are the same. So if you're not actually testing to find out what the actual cause is, you could possibly be causing way, way more harm. And we see that all the time, because somebody that has low energy levels, they automatically think, oh, I have low cortisol. Well, no, high cortisol is the same thing. So guess what? If you go in there and somebody has high cortisol, but you're treating them for low cortisol, and you give them adrenal compounds and licorice root or whatever, you're making that 10 times worse, and you could cause a lot of damage. And we've seen that across the board with clients that we're getting on the back end. It's just, this industry, I would love to say that it's getting better, but it's almost getting more confusing.
It's so tough, because the unfortunate realistic situation is that it's still incredibly easy for anybody that looks good and can come off as somewhat articulate, in some cases not even that, to post a few pictures or videos and then have one or two client transformations, usually people that would have looked awesome if they dieted on Rice Krispies and milk. And they say, look what I can do. And then everybody signs up, and you do that a few times the wrong way for a cosmetic appearance, and then it builds from there, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same old song and dance we've seen 1,000 times over. Let's focus more on the right way to do things. What is your approach, and what is your team's approach to, let's say you have a new client, male or female, that comes in and they're in okay shape. Maybe they're kind of lean, kind of strong. They feel okay. There's no pressing issues. And they're about to enter into a prep, or let's just say just an extreme diet or recomp phase. And I know those two things are different, but let's say to set the table for success for weight loss or for a transformation, just getting incredibly lean. What are some of the things you do? What's your checklist with which you use to build the initial diet, to start the initial process? How are you dotting your I's and crossing your T's when you start somebody on a new diet?
First thing is a very, very in-depth background check with what they've been doing. And that's not over the past 2 months or even year. Like we're pushing back 5, 8, 10 years, because what they've done all those years leading up to where they are now is a big telltale sign of where their body could be at this point. Obviously, we're assessing current symptoms and anything they're dealing with. So we go into a deep background check, and we're going on calls, obviously, doing our checklist. And then we're doing a current assessment as well. We basically do a health assessment, assessing all systems. But then the base is getting labs done. Like if you've never done labs or blood work, you have no idea what your foundation is. And there's a lot of things that don't have symptoms that if you're going into a prep situation or even just a basic fat loss phase, you could cause a lot of harm and more issues if you don't see those red flags and correct them before you dive into a caloric deficit. Because obviously, when you jump into a caloric deficit, you're going to drive up stress. And obviously all the cascading things that help, that go along with that, downregulation of thyroid hormone, testosterone levels dropping, cortisol levels going up. So you have this big shift that's going to occur with all these stressors increasing. So obviously, if something is off and there's a bottleneck in there that you're not aware of, you're going to cause that sympathetic system to almost go into overdrive. And then you're going to start wondering why you're having issues actually getting to the results that you want. So if you have to have that foundation, whether that's foundation of, from a weight training, we think foundation is you've been training for X amount of years, you've got the foundational muscle mass to actually get to a place where we can lose fat efficiently. But I'm talking about foundational, like from a health perspective. Like we need to know where that foundation is. And testing nowadays, as far as blood work, you can never go through insurance. So if that they'll rip you off. You'll pay $800 for stuff that literally we can get a full blown panel. And I'm talking about detailed stuff from TPO, not basic thyroid panels or basic anything. We're talking about Indepth. You can get that for $150 to $180. If you're not willing to invest that, like my team, we won't want to deal with you for the most part. Like if you're not really invested into actually correcting the issues, because it's going to be a nightmare for us, because who's going to get the blame? Like if we can't do our jobs efficiently and correctly, of course, the blame gets thrown back onto the coach. So I don't even like anymore putting ourselves in that situation to have to go through that, because it's wasting time. It is wasting money in the long run, because you're not doing what you need to do up front to set the stage to get whatever the goal may be. So you have to have that foundational lab work. Of course, there's more in-depth testing. If somebody comes to us and they're willing to spend whatever money and they like that, of course, we'll have them do a lot of testing. But in the beginning, base blood work, you can get a ton of information from that in conjunction with their background that you're doing if you do a thorough job.
Now, I speak to competitors in a lot of situations just because I've found that the bodybuilding scene is still the vocal minority on social media, meaning that, in my opinion, it influences a lot of how things are done, at least on a more beginner intermediate level. So when people are coming off of a competition or maybe several competitions, be it on their own or with a coach that has less experience, what are some of the most common red flags you're seeing in blood work from these people?
So when you're coming out of that type of situation, if you know what you're looking for, you expect things to be off. That's absolutely normal. You can't prevent down regulations of things and up regulations of certain systems, because the amount of stress you're putting on your body, because you're taking it to an unnatural state. So it's okay if there are certain markers that are elevated or high. That's honestly just a normal part of the process, because we know bodybuilding is extreme. Look, I did over 2 decades in competing, but it can be done in a healthier way. But make no mistake, if you're pushing your body to a place it doesn't want to go, honestly shouldn't go for a lot of people. So there's going to be lots of red flags initially when you're coming right out of prep. But the game plan is, once prep is done, you're out of that scenario. That's why we talk about going into health phases right after that. It ain't about your insulin sensitivity and all this stuff, trying to put on as much muscle mass, get that rebound effect coming out of a show. That's a horrible plan. You need to get your health markers, everything back to a good place, because the healthier you are, the more efficient you're actually going to build more muscle tissue and keep insulin sensitivity where it is, cholesterol levels, liver enzymes, all the things that, kind of get into a bad place when you're in that prep situation. So it's knowing what to expect and then doing what you need to do as soon as that's over with to put you on the path to, do the off season or whatever you want to call it. People will jump from that extreme of prep and to another extreme of an off season build without that middle ground of fixing what went wrong from a systems perspective in the prep situation, because that's going to happen. I don't care who you are. You can be a genetic anomaly. Something is going to go off, which is why we typically, from a lab perspective, we do the testing prior. I even, depending on the person, especially if you're talking like towards the pro ranks or, high amateur level, getting labs done in the middle of it all to see where things have gone, to see how their body is responding to all these stressors, PEDs or whatever you're throwing into the mix. And then, okay, we have those foundational points. Then let's test it again. If they have the funds, test it again after the prep. But if they don't, give it at least 8 weeks and do a health type phase, corrective phase, then test and see where you're at.
Now, let's take the competitor, or the weight loss enthusiast, we'll call it that has gone through their health phase or maybe put just less rigors on their body in general and live a generally healthy lifestyle. And let's say the blood work and the diagnostic testing is all coming back pretty much good to go, ready to rock and roll. How often do you and your team see situations where somebody wants to start a recomp or a fat loss phase and they're not eating enough already? And how often do you have to have the conversation like, hey, we might need to bring your calories up a little bit because we're starting at a place where we're not going to have a runway of progression worth working on?
Yeah, that happens probably about 80, 85% of the time. Um, and look, like there's an extreme with that too, because people think that you have to be excessively high in calories as well. Like there's people, first of all, getting their calories way too high. But at the same time, more people are definitely under eating and under consuming. Obviously, that's definitely more the female demographic than it is males. But it still happens with males. I'm not saying it doesn't because we get those cases as well. But under eating, it's just like something they're so used to, and that's like their lifestyle. And a lot of, especially the females, want to maintain a certain look. And that certain look, you're basically sacrificing your health to maintain that quote unquote look. But they don't realize if they actually feed their systems correctly and they keep their health in a good place and metabolic rate, resting metabolic rate, if that's actually good and you actually feed it to what it's supposed to be feed and you actually do periodize your nutrition, which we do, it's not like it shouldn't be like this off season of just all calorie surplus and then you have fat loss and it's all deficit. There's in-betweens in there, which a lot of people don't do, like in the maintenance type phase. But you can build your metabolism, your metabolic rate can improve beyond just obviously building muscle does that. We know it. The more lean tissue you have, the more metabolic efficiency you'll have. But at the same time, when you have other systems really healthy, detox systems, liver, that's also going to play a big factor in metabolic rate. So if you get those efficient, you build up your caloric intake to what's needed, then, you will actually stay leaner when you go into your off season and you're able to eat more and stay leaner. But a lot of people are just stuck in this like suppressed deficit, which they in their mind think is a maintenance or a surplus. And it's, 1,600, 1,700 calories. And then when they go into prep, you have nowhere to work from. So, but then there's coaches like, okay, yeah, I'll take your money. Let's go start this prep. And regardless if you have to eat 800 calories.
So tell me about this periodization. So getting away from the common tropes of off-season, increased calories, prep, decreased calories, increased cardio. What type of blocks, if you want to call them that, are you putting in for the nutrition? And are you changing their training? Is the training stimulus changing to match the nutrition? How important is that aspect of it?
I mean, when it comes to training and nutrition, you have to match it. Now, that being said, there's like certain types of training systems that you can do multiple types of diet layouts for. So like a strength-based phase, if you're doing just primary working on more strength than anything, obviously that's more lower volume approach. It's not very glycolytic. But so you can use, a high carb approach. You can do a higher fat approach. I mean, there's a lot of variety in there because of the systems that are being used for that specific training system. But then also if you're going more a little bit higher volume, higher repetition, because like metabolic stress is not just like people think kind of supersets and drop sets and things to that nature. But if you're honestly pushing upwards of 12 reps or even more, that in of itself, just doing a single straight set of that high rep, that's more metabolic stress because it's more substrate based, right? So number one, people need to understand exactly what different types of training is doing and not blindly think this is metabolic stress and this is hypertrophy or mechanical tension. And people, their definition of it or their knowledge of it isn't actually what it should be. They don't have the depth of it. But the way we think about periodization of nutrition is we want to think diversity of food because physique competitors are known for eating the exact same stuff all the time. They just change their volumes, how much of it they're eating. That causes problems long term. I've seen it in pretty much every case. I know tons of pro bodybuilders that have gone through this and had to recorrect their gut because of their history and how they eat, because the coaches aren't giving them diversity. They're either giving them macros, which there's nothing wrong with just giving macros if you're giving guidelines for those macros, but people are stuck with the same foods. There's zero diversity. So their microbiome, either they get overgrowth and or they're basically underdevelopment of the bacterial flora that's in the gut. And we know that there's a major connection between the gut and the brain axis, and then other systems in the body, like thyroid conversion. A huge percentage of that is in the gut. So guess what? When that microbiome is off, not only can't you absorb your foods properly and utilize it the way you actually want it to be utilized, you're affecting hormonal systems, brain, cognitive function. There's all kinds of downregulatory effects because you're messing up digestion, and you're messing it up because you're eating the exact same foods all the time. Like people, talk egg whites. Oh, I have sensitivity to, or allergic to it, or whatever you want. You're not allergic to it. You've just been eating 2 cups of it every single day for the last 5 years. So guess what? You create sensitivities to food because you eat it. That's the only thing you eat. It's like a food allergy test. When they do those IgG tests, they're useless because whatever you've been eating, a majority of, it's going to flag that as you're allergic to. But guess what? If you stop eating that food for 3 to 5 weeks, go do the test again, and it's going to say you're not allergic to it. So it's a false representation of allergies. You create sensitivities. There's a difference between an allergy and a sensitivity. You can correct sensitivities for the most part. So having the diversity from protein sources, obviously vegetables and fruits and everything in between, helps that microbiome kind of build that diversity that we want. So it pretty much can take anything that you throw at it from a food perspective and volume perspective. And then that obviously pays off long term. In my bodybuilding career, I went through that. Like, I was eating potatoes like religiously. And then I got to a point to where every time I would eat them, I would have so much bloat, so much gas. But I'm a stubborn bodybuilder, so I'm just continuing to eat it because it's a potato and carbs, and that's what you're supposed to eat. Same thing with rice. And then I literally just had to stop eating them for about a year. And now I'm at a spot, obviously, I can eat them again, no problems, but I don't eat them on a daily basis. I don't eat them year round either. And it's changed. I even changed me because it happened during a prep. And when I started shifting things and pulled it out, just the look of the physique changed. Even though I didn't change my calories or my macro ratios or anything, is because I started shifting my microbiome. It improved. So I was able to use the fuel that I was putting in my body way more efficiently. And it was like a night and day look. And even using PEDs, the way my body would respond to those changed drastically. Doses were able to be brought down and get way more out of less. So there's just a massive payoff if you are able to keep your systems healthy across the board with anything from the extremes of bodybuilding, using PEDs, to just your regular stay-at-home mom, taking care of 10 kids and all the stress they're dealing with. If you take care of those aspects, it'll pay off long-term.
Now, in a client that's not presenting any direct signs of any sort of specific dysbiosis and there's nothing suspected, how often are you rotating food sources? Let's say for the client that just wants to follow the plan to the T, doesn't want to think, wants to be a robot. How often are you cycling these food sources to give them nutrient diversity, to cycle in different micronutrients, to avoid those circumstances of dysbiosis? How often is this changing?
So one thing is you don't have to change the entire thing. Like, you don't have to do a 180 on every single thing you're eating. So what you'll do is you'll pick, 3 to 4 food sources that you've been consistently eating, and you're going to replace those, right? So it's like you periodize certain foods that you're doing throughout the year. So people kind of think, oh, I got to stop eating chicken. Like, they're having chicken, fish, eggs, steak. I can't eat any of those anymore. I need to change them all. No. Pick out 2 of those, shift them to a different protein source. There's your change. Same thing with vegetables, same thing with fruits, carbs, anything. Like, just pick a few of the sources and then change them out. That will create enough diversity to keep you healthy long term. Because the people think when we make changes, they always think drastic extremes for some reason. They think you got to change everything. And you don't. It's like these small little changes pay off long term. But what we'll do from a periodization standpoint, even with competitors, is I don't like diets that have names. So, keto versus carnivore versus Mediterranean or whatever. They all have pros and cons, every single one of them, which is why I don't like them. But that being said, you can absolutely utilize those name type diets for short stints. And that's where you can kind of think periodization. Will you get, like, you see people go on to a keto diet or even they jump into carnivore, like, oh, I feel so much more better. I feel amazing. More energy, cognitive function is better. I can focus. And then they're bought in. And then they'll just do that for the next year. That's not how that works. You feel better because you just change things. It's just diversity. The diet isn't magical, but you're removing some things and putting new things in. That's why the other diets work initially. But just do that for small blocks. Even going more plant-based for a very short period of time can have benefits, but long term it has horrible benefits, right? The poison's in the dose with anything that you do. So keto for 3 to 6 weeks, no problem. As long as you're doing it correctly and you do have some refeeds and things like that because of glycogen storage and things that you need as far as, if you are a competitor, there's, little nuances that you have to adjust within that. But that being said, 100% do a carnivore for 4 weeks. Do a Mediterranean for 10 to 12 weeks. I would say out of all of them, Mediterranean is probably the most well-rounded because it pretty much includes, there's nothing that it doesn't include from a micronutrient standpoint, from a sourcing standpoint. It's very, very, very diverse. I love that for probably most people that are sick and dealing with any health element. That's kind of the go-to. But everybody can benefit from it. And with bodybuilders, they're always pushing the envelope with the volume of food, number one, and then the lack of diversity. So if you improve their digestion, like we talked about, and you do that via diversity of food, they will be able to take in less food to get the same result that they were pushing before. I mean, I'm seeing people that are still blending up chicken breasts and stuff in a blender and having to drink it, which is insane because you're actually making it worse. If you have to do that, something's wrong. I don't care who you are. And I don't care if you're telling me, I got to eat 8,000 calories. Something's up. Like if you have to blend stuff to eat and you're forcing yourself that much, there's some bottleneck in the system that's not right and you need to fix it. But they don't think that way.
There's a certain point where I feel you're just pushing too hard against the grain and people try to justify it by saying, well, I'm trying to do something extreme. We're not always built to handle extremes for that amount of time. And I love the idea of taking these quote unquote named diets and just using them for what they're good at for specific purposes. But that comes back to understanding things like the training stimulus, like you said before. You wouldn't want somebody in their 4-week, let's just call it a carnivore stint or carnivore block, to be doing extreme amounts of glycolytic training because that would drive an incredibly undue amount of stress on the body. But that's on the complete flip side of the old school, and I use that lightly, coaching mentality of like, all right, calories are going to get low, embrace the suffering, do more supersets and giant sets, et cetera, because there's no understanding to how these things work. Circling back to gut health a little bit, again, for the competitor, weight loss enthusiast, really any client whatsoever that does not present with any current symptoms of anything related to dysbiosis. So there's no current problem that we're trying to fix. We're just trying to optimize the process. And I hate that word too, because it's overused, but we're trying to optimize the process. How important is the incorporation of prebiotic foods, probiotic foods, and just fiber in general? How often do you change that up? And is there ever a time in a general case to supplement with any of these things as opposed to getting it from food?
Yeah, obviously, first and foremost, you always go for food over supplements. And that's the problem too with the gut health industry is when people do have symptoms, they go take a probiotic or they take a prebiotic. And again, if you don't understand where these underlying symptoms are coming from, you can make it worse because if you do have like a bacterial overgrowth, you put in a probiotic, you're feeding that and you're making the situation worse. Same thing with greens, powders, or whatever. Like that's the thing that I don't like about, I would say 95% of greens powder. If you look at it, they all put probiotics in. It makes no sense to me. The point of the supplement is to be a greens product. So just put the concentrated levels of the greens and the fruits in there and leave it alone. That in of itself is your prebiotics and your probiotics. And you're throwing more fuel on the fire when you throw probiotics in the mix, because people are taking these every day because they think it's a health, additive into their regimen, not understanding that depending on their specific situation, they can make situations worse. So you first and foremost always go with food for any type of probiotic, because that's the best source. Now, that being said, there's certain foods that people just don't like to eat, right? So that is when, okay, well, we're going to be deficient in said prebiotic or probiotic. So that's when the supplementation should come into play. But even then, those things should still be cycled. You don't take them year round. Because, depending on the probiotic itself, there's multiple types of strains that you're dealing with. And you have some that have 15 billion CFUs, 20 billion, with probiotics now, they're going crazy with the numbers that they're putting in it. And those strains will run their course. And they're also context specific. If you're dealing with certain illnesses or deficiencies, one strain can cause issues over another. So people aren't obviously doing a deep dive into that. They're just taking a general probiotic because it's supposed to be healthy. I would say if you're going to take a probiotic and you have no knowledge base whatsoever on this, the most basic one is bifidobacteria and lactobacillus. It's two ingredients, and they're the most common strands that most people need, and you almost can't go wrong with those. I mean, you're talking like a Metagenics Ultra 4 balance. It's 2 ingredients, obviously medical grade. That's all you need. Don't go into these crazy into Vitamin Shop or GNC. And obviously there's thousands of probiotics. Stay away from the ones when you look at the ingredients list and there's like 10 things in there. But you're going to do more harm than good with that. But the foods you're talking kefir, obviously vegetables have tons of the probiotics. And then when you're talking the fiber part of the equation, that's another issue again with the bodybuilding community and the physique community, is they're not eating enough of it. And they'll go to the extremes, like all of a sudden they're getting constipated or they're dealing with these issues, and they'll throw a shit ton of fiber in their systems, which is a bad thing to do as well, because now you're going to cause all kinds of binding issues. And then also you can back yourself up even more. So I would say on average, everybody's different on how much they can take in. I can take in 60 grams in a day and I'm fine, but I've built up to that level. And the higher you can get it, the stronger like your mucosal lining is going to be. And you're going to have less chance of getting, inflammatory triggers and whatnot. Because what happens with, leaky gut, what people call it, that's just permeability and the tight junctions, because you're supposed to have like tight junctions in the lining, right? And over time, separation occurs because of what you're eating or not eating. So when you eat certain things, and even if you eat a chicken breast and you don't chew it enough, and it has to go into the gut lining, and then it has to break down even more, some of that seeps in through those linings and the tight junctions, causes an inflammatory trigger, and then there you get whatever symptom it's going to be. You do that enough over time, you can create all kinds of cascading issues up to autoimmune problems, like the inflammatory effects can go crazy deep, and then you get overactive immune response. So pretty much everything you're doing at that point causes some type of symptom. So, doing things to help keep that junction tight and kind of making your stomach almost like a goat stomach, where it's like a steel trap and nothing really affects it. Fiber is a huge component of that. But the food sources that they're eating in the physique world just isn't loaded with fibers. And also we need soluble and insoluble. But most people, rice, potatoes are fiber. No, if you actually look at the nutrient breakdown of a potato, the amount of fiber in that is like extremely, like 2 grams. That's not going to do anything for it. So they're just not eating the right stuff. It's like, look, you can have your rice, you can have your potatoes, but put things in there like carrots, like dates, whatever that has the fiber in it that you need to make up for what you're lacking in these other food sources. Like, it's not hard to put in there. And if needed, if you're still doing the diversity thing and you're eating all the foods that you enjoy, you still don't have that intake. Okay, now let's throw the supplementation part of the equation in there, but make sure also that supplement you're taking is a mixture of a little bit of soluble and insoluble. It's not one and or the other. You need both in there.
Now, part of me wants to make the comparison to the old Jay Cutler, like how much growth should you take as much as you can afford to fiber? How much fiber should you take as much as you can afford? But if I say that, somebody's going to misinterpret it and get a bowel obstruction, and it'll be my fault. So just doubling down, I should say, on the amount of fiber that you should take is basically the highest amount that you can tolerate without causing any issues. Now, that said, let's say somebody is in a weight loss or a fat loss scenario, and obviously their total caloric allowance is getting a little bit lower. Hopefully it's not incredibly low unnecessarily, but those numbers are getting lower. We do have them dieting the right way. So they are getting that diversity of carbohydrate sources and just fuel sources that have a lot of naturally occurring fibers in them. But let's say that person reacts best to the 60, 70. I do best at 80 to 90 personally. To get to those high numbers in a low caloric intake, when it is time to cross into supplements, what type of fiber supplements do you like to see utilized? Because there are 1.5 billion of them now.
The thing with the entire supplement industry is, it's like more is better in the sense of throwing everything as far as ingredients are concerned into the mix, thinking that that's a better equation. Look, like, and again, it's going to be an individual, because you'll see like something like Psyllium Plus. It's a great tool, and I would say 80% of people do extremely well with it. But then I have seen the clientele that they have a horrible response to it. So what I'll say is it's hard to say which ones are the best, but don't go for like 10 ingredients or something. Honestly, I should say 5. I would go, if you're looking from an ingredient perspective, it should be like 4 or less. Because if you're going more than 4, like it's too much for the system overall. It's going to be overwhelming, and you're going to get a net negative effect. So, but that's the tricky part because as coaches, we always say it's individualized, right? And it is. So you may have most of your clients taking this specific fiber supplement, and all of them are doing great. And then you get 1 or 2 that they're telling you they're getting these symptoms and stuff, but there'll be some coaches that won't even think it's that fiber supplement because most of their clientele is doing great off of it. And they won't take that step back and think, well, wait a minute, what variables here could be causing this? Oh, it's that. Okay, easy way to find out. Take that variable out for a couple of weeks, see if the symptom improved. There's your answer. And that goes with anything. If you have a symptom with something, don't take out 10 things at once. Don't put in 10 things at once, because you have no idea what was causing it or what's not causing it. That's the biggest mistake I see when people are changing anything in their plan, whether it is supplements, food, nutrition, stressors, whatever. Like, you need to take one little thing at a time. That way you can actually see if that variable is actually the cause of the situation. But people want to make these drastic changes, and then it's just like, okay, well, what actually helped? You have no idea. So then later on, you have no actual good data for yourself and or your client to work off of.
Now, for better or worse, kind of switching over to something that is a bit polarizing, but for better or worse, how are GLP-1s, despite what they're doing or not doing as far as general health, weight loss, et cetera, because like anything else, they are tools. Tools can be utilized correctly or incorrectly. But what type of monkey wrench atomic bomb are these dropping into the entire digestive process? What are people seeing, or what are you seeing with people that are taking them both correctly and incorrectly from a digestive standpoint due to the effects on motility?
Yeah, so when it comes to a GLP-1, like doses, it is definitely the poison in the dose. And because that is individual, because I'm seeing people, the amounts that they're using is honestly insane. And typically when we're seeing these digestive motility issues, it's because of the higher dosing. You can get a lot out of a little when it comes to that stuff. The typical range that I see that are being prescribed is 0.75 to 1 milligrams. So when we have a client using this, you always start at like the 0.25. That's enough to stimulate, obviously, the agonist response that we're looking for from the pancreas to release the insulin. And then you ride that out. And I don't mean for a week, I mean 4 to 6 weeks at least, to see the effects from a digestive standpoint, from an insulin standpoint, from a blood sugar standpoint, like see what that dose is doing with said nutrition plan that should be obviously optimized with that. And then, okay, make adjustments accordingly. I've had plenty of people that stay on the kind of the micro dose, don't have to change it ever because you're doing all the other stuff with it. And that's the problem. People are just using that as the crutch for everything. And that's where the issues will occur because they're not changing anything else. And they're just pushing higher doses because either they want more fat loss or because their blood sugar is still a little bit high and they want to pull it down fast. Instead of being patient, doing the work they need to do on the back end from all the other factors of, okay, well, why do you need the GLP-1 in the first place? Your body didn't just automatically turn on itself and get there. So you need to dive into what caused it. I'm fine with using that tool to get you there a little bit faster so we don't have to work through all these issues for a long period of time, 100%. But make sure that you're doing all the back end work along with the GLP to do it. Because now obviously you're seeing on social media, all these people are going blind and losing their sight. That's polarizing bullshit on media because they're not giving any context behind any of that. They're just saying people taking this is what's happening to them, which is not the case. And it's just the media, obviously, the way they do things and blow things out of proportion. So they'll get the likes and clicks and stuff will go viral. But, you know, you can go crazy with stupid shit like caffeine or an aspirin or something like that. I can write all kinds of polarizing things on social media of what that stuff does without actually giving you context, and it'll blow up and go viral. Doesn't mean it's actually really accurate or true to the degree that, you know, that people think is happening.
I think it all goes back to the concept of just understanding how everything really works as a whole. Like you can look at a GLP and maybe grasp the concept of GIP or glucagon, but then you don't look into, well, what happens if I completely obliterate interleukin-6 and then everything starts going to shit on a systemic level and what to do in those situations. And again, it just cycles back to understanding the process. But GLP is just one specific realm of that. That could be an entire podcast in and of itself. Going back to this big picture approach of understanding how everything's working, let's segue back even before gut health a little bit into the process of just, we'll use dieting, losing fat, prep as the example, because that's something that a lot of people watching this are going to be looking to perfect an approach. Let's say that you've set the table correctly, as I'm sure you and your team always do, and we've addressed everything, going back to that avatar of somebody that doesn't have any sort of dysbiosis, nothing in their labs or scans or anything that's problematic that has to be fixed, and it's ready to rock and roll. It's ready to start losing some body fat, start looking good for summer, start getting ready for that show, whatever it might be. What are some of the things that you look for when that plateau does happen? And let's say that it happens a little bit earlier than you would predict. Let's say, wait a minute, we really should be progressing a little bit further here. What are you looking for? What are you asking? What are you testing for? As opposed to just, okay, let's drop calories again.
Yeah. So the thing people don't understand is like everybody's different on how adaptive their metabolism is and metabolic rate. Right. We'll have some people that hit plateaus really quick. And we have other people that you don't change anything for like 8 weeks and they're still progressing. There's nothing wrong with one person versus the other. That's just different physiology and genetics at the end of the day. Now, obviously, the pre-prep situations does set them up to be as efficient as their body can be during that scenario. So, when it comes to somebody plateauing really early, a couple things we look at initially is like, okay, well, how much did we actually drop out of the gate from a caloric deficit standpoint, percentage wise of what their regular intake was? Because the things that we see with somebody that has a pretty adaptive metabolism is we typically need to go with a bigger cut from the beginning. Because when you're doing a smaller initial cut in your calories, their body adjusts to it so fast that nothing happens, right? And that's also to preface this by saying that the calories that you go to in your off season that you build up to, people will perceive that being like this all out number. Like if I take 500 from that number, that's enough of a deficit. When in reality, you need to think of what their actual maintenance level is. So what we like to do, honestly, is like we build up to a certain level in their off season, just throw a number out there, say 4,000 calories. And then when we know we're going to start to prep, there's like a little phase between true peak off season and then prep. So you say 4 to 6 weeks. And then we're going to drop them down a little bit to kind of see where their true kind of maintenance levels are, to where their body is just kind of sustaining and maintaining. We kind of get there and hover there. Say we went from 4,000 down to about 3,500, and they're chilling there, keeping everything that they've gained. Everything's well. Okay, well, now we have kind of their true type maintenance right now. Now we can make that true deficit cut to what we perceive as best for them. Because before then, we've already learned if they have an adaptive metabolism. We're already testing all this stuff. So now we know if we need to do a 500 calorie cut or do a 300 calorie cut, or even some people honestly it's 250. Just depends on the situation. But we definitely see the people that tend to plateau fast are the ones that need a bigger drop out of the gate. That being said, too, once you do that bigger drop, you'll progress for a little bit longer. But then when you do start hitting plateaus there, those are also the people that you typically need to really start throwing the refeeds in early. So now your frequency of that's going to come earlier than the other people that can progress for 8 or 9 weeks. Some people don't have to have refeeds for 8, 10 weeks. They're just progressing and everything's great. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have these people that plateau very early. And this is where people and coaches kind of get confused, because they think, okay, well, I just need to push more and more and more because I had to do the big cut. They progressed really well off of that. So I guess because our body's adapting the way it does, I need to push another big drop to make it keep responding. Well, no, it's the opposite. Now they've downregulated things to an extent, to a greater degree. Now you need to feed them up for a refeed of 1 to 2 days. And the whole refeed scenario with us, like we're looking for weight gain when we give somebody a refeed. If we give them a surplus and they don't gain anything the next day, you better give them another refeed, because you're not actually getting out of that what you want. And people are afraid to do that back to back. But you need to look for the response you're looking for. And if you don't get it, if they were to drop weight the next day or stay the same, you need to give them more food again, because you're trying to stimulate metabolic activity. And if you're not actually doing that, what was the point of giving them the refeed in the first place? So get out of it what you're trying to get out of it. And then, go back to your deficit. And then what happens over time with these types of people is their frequency of their refeeds get closer and closer and closer together. So like, say it was every 6th day, then we're going to have to move it to 5th, 4 days in between, and so on and so forth, to kind of keep their body moving. You have to keep toggling things. And then you can even get crazy in the end if you really know what you're doing from a training perspective with the nutrition part of the equation. They're pushing hypertrophy, and they've kind of hit this bottleneck with fat oxidation. Their calories are low. Obviously, carbohydrates are typically lower at that point, but they're running into a bottleneck and they just can't seem to lose anymore. Okay, well, let's kind of shift the training system for like 1 week even. Like you can do this for just one week, to where you go into more of a metabolic stressor type situation, APK stimulus, and then you keep their calories the same, but you change the ratios around to where you drop their fats from, say, like 20% down to even 5%, put that back in carbs, keep protein obviously as it is. So now you're going to fuel this training system you're putting in there that's glycolytic, obviously more lactate induced as well. And with the lactate part of the equation, that becomes a net negative, because to recycle lactic acid requires a lot of energy and ADP to do that, to get it back into the energy ATP that we need. That's a net negative. So now you've created all these cool little systems going to push fat oxidation for a week. You're just putting in there, it's kind of almost, I don't like saying shock the system. I hate when people do that, but just to change things up, and then go back to what you were doing. Shift the ratios back around, low carb, back into base mechanical tension. But you've stimulated all these mechanisms. Now the body's going to be a little bit more efficient at pushing fat loss. So there's all kinds of fun ways that you can do things and change it up to get the stimulus you're after. But a lot of people kind of stick to the basic black and white approach of training never changes, and we just add in more cardio and we take more food away and throw a refeed in here and there.
So having these extra tools in your tool belt really does open up these really cool ways to really facilitate change and break through these plateaus. So just for anybody that is watching this that is kind of like, I kind of understand that, but maybe I'm not 100% there, let me just clarify and make sure that I understand. In a situation where somebody has an incredibly adaptive metabolism, obviously you want to make those bigger drops, kind of front loading them right off the gate. That said, if you're making bigger drops, bigger jumps, you're getting closer to that minimum threshold faster. Thereby, you don't have that long of, I use the term runway of progression a lot. You don't have that long of a runway to continue to make those big drops. So that's where you incorporate those refeeds. You push those closer and closer together. And now the really brilliant thing that you pointed out, I really feel like there's maybe 1% of coaches out there or teams out there that do this, is that you're saying that you can get to a point where caloric intake can be maintained at a similar overall caloric level, but by switching into a more macronutrient-based profile that's favoring glycogen and then training in a metabolic stimulus. And for anybody that doesn't understand what that is, it's essentially more work crammed into the same time frame. So maybe that's your time for supersets, lower rest periods, higher rep sets, et cetera, more go, go, go. You can be taking in the same calories, but you're training in a system that's basically plowing through glycogen that takes a ton of energy to plow through the glycogen. And thereby your simple training stimulus is now leading to more potential lipolysis because the macronutrient breakdown and the subsequent training match together better. Is that a kind of a decent overview of how you were saying it?
But I also think from a physiological perspective, right? Because when you're driving carb, like they've been in a low carb intake for an X amount of time, and then all of a sudden you're giving them this bolus amount of carbs for up to a week, what's the antagonist to insulin? It's cortisol, right? So what happens when we are deep in a prep? Cortisol's through the roof. Stress is high. So guess what happens when you give them this massive bolus of carbs? Insulin's going to go up, which means it's going to counter the effects of cortisol. So all the training stuff you said is correct, but you're also drastically dropping cortisol. When cortisol is low, you're in a place that can oxidize fat way more efficiently than if it's in a high stress state. So it's more digging deeper on a deeper level with physiology too, of the effects of the carbs on the effects of insulin, and then the effects of insulin on cortisol, because they counterbalance each other.
Mm-hmm. Because when there's that incredible need for energy, cortisol is basically saying we need energy in the blood, turn shit into energy. And then when it's in the blood, the insulin then needs to put that where that needs to go. Now, by what you're saying is we can manipulate just the macro breakdown and the training to take advantage of how that process works. And now we're operating outside of calories in, calories out. We're breaking through plateaus. We're getting leaner faster. We're actually getting more healthy because we're not taxing our system as much. It's just all these different things compounding on each other to just continue to take us where we need to go. Now, one last thing that I do want to touch on is as the traditional linear prep model progresses, what we talked about a little bit before is that just basic approach of calories are going to go down, cardio is going to go up, training is going to be crazy. Now's the time to progress through the suffering and push forward and just go on autopilot, take a few extra scoops of pre-workout, throw your Clen in with your, I want to say NO explode, and that makes me seem old, but whatever, and just go train and just push through. Now, that is working against all this. Now, there's 1,000 things based on what I just said that we could dissect and fix and just completely just dump all over. But from the simple aspect of what the training is doing as you go into the show, looking at it outside the realm from periodization, if somebody's going at it in such a way that's that meticulous and, in my opinion, correct. But in a linear fashion, as you're getting closer to the show, energy levels are getting low, caloric expenditure is really high. What should be happening with the weight training? Because that's not the time to push these crazy giant sets and supersets outside of a refeed situation.
No, volume should be getting lower. Because you don't have the substrate there to recover. So the last thing you want to do is impede recovery, because then you are taking a chance of the body utilizing amino acids and stuff as a fuel source. So obviously the last thing you want to do is to break down muscle tissue to create energy. So look, there's a certain part in prep, you're not building any more muscle. Just get that into your head. Like, that's not happening. So guess what? You're just maintaining. Doesn't take a lot to actually maintain your tissue by any means. And then from a safety perspective, obviously, you're having things like joint integrity, and then, the pros and cons of going to failure, because you're putting yourself more at risk for injuries the closer you are, the deeper you are in prep, the closer you are to a show. So you need to mitigate those risks. So, your RIRs should be at least a minimum of 1 to 2 when you're, inside of 4 weeks, because the body is just in a state to where anything can happen. Because now your connective tissue, tendons, and everything are more susceptible to injuries, because it just doesn't have anything in there from a recovery standpoint, or even to help stabilize and leverage wise, that it did prior to, obviously, when you had higher body fat levels. So you need to definitely lower the volume. And even, people are still training 6 days a week, or you can literally lower that to 4 days a week and you'll be completely fine. And that's just giving you more time to recover. It is not as easily to lose muscle as people want to perceive. As long as there's mechanical tension being placed on that tissue and you're keeping it at an RIR of 2 or so, your muscle's not going anywhere. And then, for most of the people taking PEDs on top of that, come on. I mean, you're in an environment that's preserving your tissue. But even from a natural perspective, you're going to preserve tissue. That's just perception of, I need to keep my volume up, or I need to keep doing more and pushing failure because that's what got me here type mindset. You're taking chances that shouldn't be taken, especially for the work that you've put in over the last 3 to 4 months. Do not risk it over something like that, because it's not going to benefit you whatsoever.
How do we know if we're still pushing too hard, or how do we know if our client's still pushing too hard? Because at that stage in the game, everybody's tired, everybody's run down. What are we looking out for to know if we need to back off on the training stimulus even more?
Yeah, if there's, if you're pushing too hard, like any type of mechanical breakdown in your execution. And honestly, at that point too, I would move to like 90% machines and cables. That way you're taking the stability part of the equation out. So you're lowering risk even more when you're in that situation. So there's all kinds of cool little ways you can manipulate without, making anything drastic changes. But yeah, I mean, from the exhaustion setting in and the mindset obviously shifting, and you don't have the clarity that you had prior to being that deep into prep. There's no perfect scenario. We just have to, if you're a coach, give your client guidelines and, just obviously keep reiterating it, checking in on them. Like, look, you need to make sure that you're not pushing to true all out failure, mechanical failure. Keep a couple reps in the tank to be safe. And, you can mitigate risk, but obviously at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the execution of the person doing it. Nothing's 100%, but you need to do your best to kind of do what you can to prevent it.
Now, as subtle as a change that might feel like, that can be a complete game changer for somebody, particularly at the very tail end of a prep or a fat loss phase, or if you're just preparing for a photo shoot or for summer or whatnot. Keeping in mind, again, the all-encompassing thing we keep touching on is understand how things work, so you understand how to apply these different things.
Yeah, I mean, when I went hard, because I was so close to getting it, I had the initial show I had wanted to do to win. I ran myself into the ground. I was training 6 days a week. I was doing, 6 days, 90-minute cardio sessions and low calories. And I just got into my own head because I was coaching myself. And my wife was literally like, "What are you doing? Like, you don't never do this." And I'm just in my head, like, I'm right there. I can win this show. And then I do the show. I mean, it took me forever to even make weight because my body was so inflamed. I was in the sauna for I don't know how long just to make the weight. And it was like one of my worst showings ever. Like I looked horrendous. And then I had North Americans coming up, and that was only a 6-week time frame to make a shift. And I literally did a 180. I went from 6 days a week of training down to 4. I went from 90 minutes of cardio daily down to 2 5-minute hit sessions and then just walking daily. And then within 3 weeks, my body completely did a 180 transformation going into the show. weight was below the cap for weigh-ins. I had no problems feeding up. And then in 6 weeks' time, my body was just completely different from the 6 weeks prior to one of my worst showings. And it's because I reduced the stress on my body. Overall, inflammation dropped, systems became more efficient, and then I won my class. And that's a mind shift. And I even stepped away from social media. I didn't tell anybody I was doing that next show. My wife was like, just do your thing, stop going out there and promoting on social media and this and that, and kind of hibernate in a sense and do what you know, what you need to do. You teach everybody else to do. And I did that. And I was there with clients doing the show. They didn't even know I was competing. I did the show. I stepped on stage. I won. And then that's the end of that story.
And that literally is a true testament to understanding what's going on a deeper level and being able to make those changes. And we all get caught up sometimes. We all push too hard sometimes. I think the single worst slogan or phrase in bodybuilding is embrace the suffering. Yeah, sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, but you want to make sure that you're not just driving the car till the wheels completely fall off, because then the car's not going anywhere. Alan, this has been absolutely fantastic. And I think there's a lot of take-home actionable pieces of this podcast that people can start looking at to incorporate into their own training programs, into their clients' training programs, that might seem just like, oh, this little change can help out a little bit, but they can be complete game changers. I can't stress that enough. If somebody wants to learn more from you, absorb more of your content, work with you or your team, where do they find you?
Yeah, you can reach out to us. The company's name is Maximum Performance Health. We have our own website. You can reach out to us anytime. You can obviously, I have people do my DMs. If you DM me or one of my coaches, we're happy to get back to you, do a free consultation. From the education standpoint, obviously I'm part owner of Metabolic Mentor University. I have my own hybrid training course in there as well. So we teach some periodization, the foundational part of all this, because the problem is, people in the functional space, it's like they're great at functional training, but then they don't have the training part of the equation mixed in. And they don't understand. A lot of people have health issues because their training's horrible. Honestly, they just do way too much. So we have that in MMU, which obviously is our education platform. We have a lot of new exciting stuff that we're coming out with hopefully this year. Lots of partnerships, collaborations I'm excited about, but I can't really divulge those until contracts are signed, and things that we're doing over in the Saudi Arabia, Middle East area, that we're trying to obviously go global with everything that we're doing. So big changes. We're excited for it. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. And thank you again. I value your time. I know what a busy guy you are, and hopefully we can have you back on soon.